Hi guys, it's Bella and welcome back to my channel. So today I have a really exciting video for you guys. I am taking my love of true crime and makeup and putting them together, and I'm going to be doing my makeup while I tell you guys about a story that I find fascinating and I think it'll really interest you guys too. All the makeup that I'll be wearing will be linked down below, and without further ado, let's get started in on this case. So our story begins in 1993. This murder case is called the West Memphis 3. This crime took place in West Memphis, which was located on the Bible Belt. The town was known as being a small Christian town that was very conservative and didn't really have any issues with murder cases. So this is very shocking for the town what's about to happen. You know, they've never dealt with anything like that before. The three victims are 8-year-olds Stephen Edward Branch, who was born November 26, 1984. And then we have Christopher Mark Byers, who was born on June 23rd, 1984. And then last we have James Michael Moore, who was born on July 27th, 1984. And for the sake of this video, for James Michael Moore, I will be referring to him as Michael because that's what he preferred. For Steve Edward Branch, I'm going to be referring to him as Stevie. That's because that was his nickname up until he passed away. These 8-year-old boys were all best friends, and they were in the 2nd grade together. They hung out all the time after school. They even were in Cub Scouts together. And they like to do things typical little 8-year-old boys like to do, like going around on their bikes in the neighborhood, going through like forest, going through the woods, just doing little boy things. And just to note, my face might be getting like randomly red in patches. It's only because all these lights are making me really hot, so you might just see it come and go kind of a thing. So let's go over the events that happened that day. At this time, this town was considered quote-unquote safe. On Wednesday, May 5th in 1993, it was a normal day. Stevie Branch was picked up from school by Pam. Pam Hobbs is his mom. Pam Hobbs actually remarried, and that's why they don't have the same last name. The man that she remarried to is Terry Hobbs, and Terry Hobbs lives with Pam and Stevie. So at 2:30, Stevie was picked up. When he went home, his mom asked, or told him to make sure that he did his homework, and he let his mom know that he had already done his homework and he was finished with it for the day. He hung up his backpack where it usually goes. Pretty soon later, his friend Michael Moore, aka James Michael Moore, came over to Stevie's house. And after Michael had been there for a tiny bit, they had asked could they go back over to Michael's house. Pam at first refused because she was in the middle of cooking dinner and also because she'd be going to work at 5 p.m. But the boys persisted, and like any normal parent, you always want to do whatever, will make your kid happy. And so Pam gave in, but Pam told Stevie, you have to be back by 2:30. I mean, not 2:30, I'm sorry, 4:30, before she went to work. So that way she knows that he was home, he was safe, all that good stuff. And Stevie, I mean, he was only 8 at the time, but he wasn't, he was very punctual when it came to his parents and whatever kind of curfew they gave him. Michael and Stevie take off over to Michael's house, and they're gonna do stuff too outside of Michael's house, like going to the woods, which we'll talk about later. Around 3:35, Chris Byers, the 3rd boy that was a part of this friend group, came over to Stevie's house and asked Pam where Stevie was. So Pam informed him that they went over to Michael's house. So then Stevie got on his bike, and I think I forgot to mention this before, but the way that these boys were getting around, Stevie and Michael too, was by bikes. Now that we're getting into the timeline of events, I just wanted to note that the timeline is a little bit confusing. There's different versions of the timeline. There's different people saying different things. This timeline is very much approximate, just because it was a lot of confusion by multiple people and the timings of it. So at 4:15, Terry Hobbs came home from work and he was going to drive Pam to her job at 5 o'clock. Well, they were gonna leave at like 4:45-ish. 4:45 rolls around. They still haven't seen Stevie. He hasn't come home. Terry takes Pam to work, and then Terry told the police that he, between then and when he picked up Pam around 9:15, that he was looking for Stevie this whole time. However, this was refuted by his friend, who had claimed that Terry had stopped by his house to just hang out and play the guitar during that afternoon, or I guess evening. Which, if you have a child missing, one would assume that you're not going to go just chill out playing the guitar at your friend's house instead of looking for them. But that's just me. At 6:30, that officially is when the boys are last seen. The boys were last seen by both a neighbor that happened to see, and when this is interesting, the neighbor that saw them at 6:30 saw all three boys by this park called Robin Hood Park. And they said that they saw Terry running after the boys while they're on their bikes, and he was yelling at them. So Terry denied this. He said that that didn't happen. But additionally, you had Christopher Byers' parents now at 6:30 worrying too. So by 7 o'clock, Mark Byers, who was Christopher Byers' adoptive dad, decided to call 911 and filed a missing person report. And then pretty soon, Michael Moore's parents also realized their son was missing, and they reported their son missing. So the last person to report their son missing would be Stevie's parents. The official search doesn't really go on until the next day because it was so late at night when all this got reported. At 9:18 p.m., Terry Hobbs goes to Pam's work, and I believe her work was a diner type of thing. She was a waitress. So when he goes to go pick her up, like I said, there's no cell phones. So when he drives there with their little daughter, Amanda. And Amanda is staying in the car while Terry walks straight past Pam and goes to a payphone that's in the diner. And Pam thought this was strange. She didn't mention anything, but she goes up to her daughter and offers her candy. And when she asked where Stevie was to her daughter Amanda said, "Mama, we can't find him." So when Terry gets off the phone, he tells Pam about what's going on, and he claimed that he had called the police, and that's why he like raced to the phone. Which, it's weird that it took him until that time when Pam's finally coming home for him to show kind of interest. Just pointing that out there, a little bit suspicious. Pam, at the time, she said when she found out that Steve was missing, that she knew deep down that he was gone. Like, she just knew it in her heart, which is really, really sad. I feel like a lot of the times mothers maybe do have intuition of what happened. I can't even imagine what she was thinking. Obviously, they raced home, and by 9:25, literally less than 10 minutes after she had been picked up, they called 911 to report Stevie missing. Said that night a small search started, and they mainly were looking at what I had mentioned earlier, which was the Robin Hood Hills, which is kind of like a drainage area, somewhere where parents didn't really like their kids going to. This was a place that the boys loved to go to. They also searched the rest of the woods because the woods were deceivingly pretty thick around that area. So they were looking there, and then there was also an interstate highway that had a bus stop. It was Interstate 40. Decided that they would just go look around those areas. But like I said, the full search didn't commence until the next day, May 6th. So obviously it was a lot of concern, not only for the time, but also because typically, like I said before, little boys aren't stolen, especially when there's 3 of them. It would be assumed that maybe some of them could fight back or something like that. It was just very, very strange. This case started to pick up traction, especially other departments were hearing about what was happening. They were sending over people to come and help out. And one of the people that came to help out, actually, he heard it on the radio. He actually was from a different county. He was from a county called Crittenden County. And he was a juvenile officer. His name was Steve Jones. And he had called West Memphis and asked if they needed any help in the search. And so, of course, they did. So he decided to go out there and search for the boys because he was concerned. And so he decided he was going to try to think like the little boys would have thought. And so he had assumed that Robin Hood Hills would be a place that they would go to. So he thought he would check there first. It's a good thing he did, because on May 6th at 1:45 p.m., Steve Jones was looking around the creek in Robin Hood Hills and he saw a sneaker just floating. And so he went in to grab it, and when he went in, he actually stepped on something in the water and almost fell over. Or I think he actually did fall over. And the thing that he got caught on was one of the 3 dead bodies. All 3 of them were there. They were weighed down by large sticks and logs, including their clothes, but all the boys had no clothes on. Once Steve Jones realized what happened, he reported it in. Some other officers came there. They went to go take the bodies out onto the bank of the creek. I'll be honest, the crime scene was horrific. If you're watching this and you are, you know, not used to true crime and its brutality, this case is on the more severe side, I would say. I'm someone, I can stomach things really well, but this case it just seems very wrong. Like I said, they found all 3 boys and they were all naked and they were hogtied. But the way that they were hogtied wasn't all 4 limbs in the back. It was like right arm to right leg, left arm to left leg. And all 3 boys were like this. And like I said, they were naked. They did find some of the clothes of the boys, like I said before, that was being weighed by sticks. But they ended up not being able to recover 2 of the boys' underwear. And also only 2 of the bikes were in the ravine. So they never recovered the 3rd bike, which I thought was really interesting. Christopher Byers had the worst of the injuries. He had been castrated and he had succumbed to his death due to his injuries and blood loss. And with Stevie Branch and Michael Moore, they had died technically from drowning, but they did have blunt force trauma to the head and little cuts and bruises and stabs on their body too. A luminol test was conducted at the crime scene to see, you know, if it had taken place there, and there was blood seen, and it looked like, based off of the luminol test, that the boys were killed there. To note that actually really was interesting to investigators was that all 3 of the ties were different types of ties. So that made them believe, or led them to believe, that this was multiple people, which would make sense because with 3 little boys, it would be very hard for one person to restrain them, especially because they had bikes. So they could have probably escaped a little bit easier if it had been one person. It would have also just been easier to overpower the person. There wasn't any drag marks, it's like indicating that the boys were forcefully taken there. It was believed that they either were already there or they knew a person who asked them to go there. So 2 hours after finding the body, finally at 3:20 p.m. the coroner came out to take a look at the bodies. And like I said, the bodies had been moved from the creek up to the grass. So when the coroner got there, also I forgot to mention the medical examiner got there. We'll talk about him later. But the bodies were in pretty bad shape, especially because they'd been in the water for almost 24 hours. They would find that possibly the turtles in the water were causing some of the wounds by eating the decaying body. Notice that there was some wounds to like their butt, like the more fleshy, meatier part of their body, and so that's what made them believe that possibly when their bodies were dumped in there, that turtles, because that creek was known for having turtles in it, possibly the turtles were eating at it, because it was kind of strange. It was more like bite marks, but it didn't look human. And unfortunately, because it was put in the water, there was very little to no DNA from the crime scene. Authorities started thinking, what's going on? You know, thought this was weird and out of the ordinary. So the police decided to take a different route than, you know, the traditional one. You know, looking into the parents, looking into people that they knew. Like, I, for one, maybe would have looked into maybe some of the Cub Scout leaders, because the knots that were made were kind of intricate. Not a lot of people are very know a lot about making those type of knots. You typically would be like Cub Scouts, or the only thing else I can think of off the top of my head is like in the army. Oh, I forgot to note, medical examiner slash forensic pathologist, his name was Frank Pieretti, was not board certified. Not board certified. So technically he shouldn't have been practicing. And get this too, he wasn't board certified because he failed it twice, and his actual certificate for whatever college he went to was an online degree school. So not only did he not go to medical school, but he wasn't even certified to be doing what he was. So he was shortly fired after this case, but that was brought up during trial, and I thought that was interesting. Because the murders involved children and gender mutilation, during this time, which happened in the 1980s and the beginning of the 1990s, there was what was called the Satanic Panic. The Satanic Panic cast a fear over the US during this time. So there was even rumors that in the woods that the boys were killed in, that there was satanic rituals happening. And also to note, there was never any proof of any rituals done that was satanic found at all at the crime scene. So they were just assuming, because of the way it looked, this rumor about how it had satanic rituals, part of it spread like wildfire in the small town. A lot of people totally believed it because they were scared, and they were, you know, Christians, and thinking that, you know, kids were being sacrificed for the devil just didn't sit well with them, and they were hungry for conviction. They wanted to find out who this killers were and put them to justice. That way they didn't have to worry anymore in their small town. This is where in the story we introduce Damien Echols. So Damien was, I believe, 17 at the time, and then as we go on in the story, he'll soon turn 18. Damien Echols was a poor white kid from like the wrong side of the town. He fit the satanic profile really well, because according to the people, not me. It's funny because I'll get to it. So the reason why they thought he looked like it is because he had black hair, jet black hair, he wore black nail polish, he listened to like dark music, and he was just like a very dark individual. He also walked around kind of with like a chip on his shoulder. So he really had the best attitude, like he didn't put his best foot forward when it came to people. So when they decided to zero in on Damien, hard to argue, you know, that he didn't seem like that at all. A lot of the research that I did with the movies that have been made out about this case, because this case is extremely popular in Hollywood. If you guys don't already know about it, I'll go over it. A lot of this like movies that have been made out tend to brush over the part where why he was brought in. It kind of made it just seem like, oh, police picked him out of nowhere, but it actually was from a tip-off that they got. Someone had called in, and the person that actually called in is Damien had a girlfriend named Dimitri Tier, and Aunt Narlene Hollinsworth decided to call the police because she said, and I think I forgot to mention this, that the only thing that police kind of for sure know is that the boys were killed between 6:30 and 8 o'clock, which is kind of a big time gap, but at least it kind of narrows it down a little bit. And the aunt said that she had been seeing Damien walk around the crime scene at 9 o'clock that night, and he was covered in mud. Police have to call him in because suspects at this point, and so they're going to look into this lead. I just want to present all the facts around because I don't want to act biased in one direction or another. That's why I'm gonna just try to give you guys a lot of facts, but I don't want you to think that I'm trying to guide you in like one direction or the other. So I'm just gonna give you a little bit of an extensive history on Damien, just like I will with police, because there's a lot between the two of them. Damien had and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because, like I said, a lot of the movies that have been created about this are pretty biased towards Damien and the other people that'll come up, but there is some reasons why, and like some people still believe that he was involved. Damien had an extensive mental health history. movies, they kind of just skate over it, but I think it's important. So he actually applied for Social Security disability, and when he applied, he claimed, like he said it as himself, said that he was homicidal, suicidal, schizophrenic, sociopath, and he was manic depressive. So he was saying that he was unable to work because he was all those things. And in fact, it got so bad that in 1982, he had a court order to have to go to a psychiatric hospital. He also had a violent school record too on top of it. He was known for having a temper, acting violently towards other students and teachers, and just all around having a really bad attitude, which, you know, he was from the more poor side of the town. He was an outcast. And for Damien, like, he was very much an outcast in that small conservative town. Especially sad because had he been in a different place in the US, like, you know, that's more accepting or diverse, he would have been a lot happier. Sorry, I had to fix the lighting. It's getting a little bit wonky on my face. And he was known for, like, threatening teachers, and there was a story that went around that Damien drank another kid's blood. When they were in class one day, some kids started bleeding and Damien just apparently drank it, but this could just be another rumor, honestly. Damien very much decided to play into this narrative pretty much that he was kind of given. So when the police brought him into the police department, he was being kind of a shithead. So I forgot to mention that he did have the words evil tattooed on his knuckles, which didn't help his case at all. He was giving them a hard time. So when Damien was first brought in, like I said, he was being cocky, didn't have a solid alibi. It claimed that he was talking to girlfriends on the phone that night. But when police officers contacted the girls, and even though they never testified in court, when doing interviews later, some of those girlfriends said that they were never on the phone with him. So his alibi kind of fell apart, especially because he was at home. And another thing that kind of didn't help him is that they had asked his grandma, you know, had he been home during this time? And his grandma wasn't sure, and she was like, I think he might have left at 8 o'clock. So that also didn't help him. The police kind of asked him some strange questions. The police asked Damien what he thought that the killer must have felt committing the murders. And Damien's response was that the person probably felt good about what they did, that they had felt good that they had the power to do what they did, such as taking a life. He figured that the killer probably already knew the kids and probably asked them to come to the woods. He said that the boys were not big, not smart, and easy to control. He also figured that the killer wouldn't be too worried about the screaming because, one, they were in the woods, and two, there was an expressway not too far away that could drown out the noise. So definitely a detailed response, even though they didn't have any technical evidence against him. So really zeroing in on Damien from this point on, and they were convinced, given his character, that he was into Satanism, and there had been rumors too that he was into that kind of stuff, but Damien later would say that he believes, like, he's Christian, he believes in the same God. Police really zeroed in on him. They weren't looking at anyone else. So I bet you're wondering why this is called the West Memphis 3 and what makes up the other 3, or the other 2. So the other 2 boys making up the West Memphis 3 would be Jesse Miskelly and Jason Baldwin. So Jason Baldwin was actually really good friends with Damien. They were close, almost like brothers, they said, and you'll really see this as the story goes on. Jason got wrapped up in this because of Damien. The police really didn't have a reason. He didn't dress like in dark clothing. He actually really liked school, and he was doing relatively well in school, especially with the band. He really enjoyed music. But unfortunately, because he was like Damien, he wasn't wealthy, and he was good friends with Damien, the police thought, well, there had to be multiple people, so we're just gonna zero in on these two guys. Key component, or the key evidence that would ultimately solidify their participation in this case, came from actually Jesse Miskelly. So Jesse was a borderline mentally challenged student who was not even a student. He was barely friends with Jason and Damien, but they were really nice to him. But unfortunately, he had such a low IQ that he ended up dropping out of school, and his IQ was so low that he was borderline, actually, like borderline mentally challenged. To give you an example of it, his IQ was 72, and having a borderline severe mental intellectual disability, that's a mouthful. To have a borderline intellectual disability, you have to be anywhere from a 70 to 85 IQ. So he was right at the border of actually being mentally challenged. He was literally called borderline. So irregardless of that, he becomes involved with the case. So when Jesse Miskelly was brought into the police department, he wasn't with his dad, and he didn't have a lawyer present. And likewise to the other boys, he was from a low-income family. And his father allowed for him to be interviewed for that 7 hours, even though he was mentally challenged. And during those 7 hours, over the course of it, Jesse confesses, and he implicates both Damien and Jason, saying that all three of them did it. And yeah, and the reason why I'm not even going to bother going into the details is that he told so many different versions of the story, so many details and parts of the timeline that weren't correct with what he was saying. What we'll note is that the police, over those hours, literally 7 hours worth of interrogations, they only had like less than 30 minutes of it recorded. They said that for some reason it wasn't recorded or something like that, which doesn't make sense to me, but okay. So you can tell based on the tapes that Jesse didn't even know what he was talking about. Jesse at first said that at 9 o'clock, like the crime occurred at 9 a.m. that day, which one, the boys were in school and there's record of that. And then two, Jesse was in school. Like at the time he was still in school. He was in school. So, and there was record of that. So this is how mentally challenged this kid was, and he was 17 at the time, so he was still a kid. This is how mentally challenged he was, that he didn't even realize the lies that he was giving, like, didn't make any sense. But you have to understand, and I'm not gonna go completely into it, but people say that, like, police, it's easy for them to coerce people sometimes. But with Jesse, I come from a family with mental health, like autism and Down syndrome. So I kind of understand the way of their thinking, which they want kind of like instant gratification, or they don't really think too much into the future about anything. Too much, they just want it then and there. If something's irritating them, they just like, it has to be done. So I think in my mind with Jesse is that he was tired of being there. He just wanted to go home. When he was saying certain things, he was guided in like a different direction. So for example, when he said 9 o'clock, like the police officer, like, and you can hear it through the recording, he's kind of like, are you sure it wasn't like later in the day? And then Jesse goes like, oh, maybe it was like at 5 or 6. And he's like, are you sure it wasn't like at 8 or 9? So of course on June 3rd, 1984, Jesse confessed to some crazy stuff, but ultimately confessed to the murders and implicated both Damien and Jason. So Jesse, he did end up recanting his statement, however, and claiming that police coerced him into it. He quickly recanted his statement not too long afterwards, his confession. He was scared of the police, and that's why he admitted. However, he did tell the story numerous times in numerous ways to different people. So it wasn't like he confessed once. No, he like repeated it a couple times. And the crazy thing is that he had a solid alibi too. He was at a wrestling event at the town over, and there was proof that he was there. That didn't matter. You know, the police, once they had this confession, they felt like they could finally bring in Damien and Jesse, and put them all under arrest. Unfortunately, well, I mean, I guess it's fortunately for the West Memphis 3, but really, police did not have any DNA evidence. There was zero forensic or DNA evidence connecting them to the crime scene. Confession was the strongest evidence connecting both Damien and Jason to the murder. I accidentally got mascara right here. I'm trying to fix it. Before they went to trial, the prosecutor decided that because of Jesse's statement, he had to be tried in a different trial, and then Jason and Damien were both tried in the same trial. Before the trial even happens, the prosecutor, because they knew that they didn't have strong enough evidence, offered to both Damien and Jason that if they testified against each other, that they could get off on a lesser sentence, more like 10 years, as opposed to potentially life in prison. But because, and you'll see this as a reoccurring thing, Jason and Damien are like brothers, and they really did care for each other. All right. So next we're gonna go to trial, and if you think you know how this story ends, there's a reason why there's going to be another full video on this. I could not combine all this information, and I'm already kind of whittling down the information too. There's so much to this case. So next we are going to go to trial, and I bet you're thinking, Bella, I already know how this is probably going to end. They're either going to get guilty or not guilty. Like, okay. No. Oh, no. I picked a case that had a twist, and then another twist, and then another twist. So we're not just going to trial, baby, once, not twice, but 3 times. And we're gonna have some other key players coming into this, such as Johnny Depp and Winona Ryder. I'll see you in next week's video where we continue on with this case and the outcome of it. If you guys like this video, feel free to give it a like or subscribe so that you can see more of my content. I love stuff when it comes to beauty, skincare, true crime, all that good stuff. And I will link my Instagram down below. It's my instablog if you want to follow me on there and see what I'm up to. Alright guys, so have a good night, and I'll see you guys later.